Yet, as you went through that second list of questions, think about the names and the faces that came to mind. Now, here's the question. The real question is not how many people show up on your list, but the real question is how often would you show up on the list of somebody else? That's the question. How often would you show up on the list of somebody else? I believe as an organization, CBMI would show up on the list of many people. We're talking about your relationship with the faithful. See, it's so easy to get caught up aspiring for those titles and those labels and those positions that are deemed to be above where you are. But what about the real people who are helping you in your journey? How do you honor them? Remember in our teaching series, The Life of Honor, what's honor? Honor is tangible respect. It's not just thinking in the recess of your mind, yeah, that's a good brother, that's a good sister. No, it's tangible respect. Proverbs 20 verse 6 says, many will say they are loyal friends. Proverbs 20 verse 6 says, but who can find one who is truly reliable? If you want to know who your real friends are, have a crisis. Have a crisis. Go through a difficult season. Paul was constantly, if you were faithful, even if you weren't faithful, but those people who were faithful to Paul, he was constantly reaching out to them. He'd say, greet the household of so-and-so. Greet Priscilla and Aquila. Make sure you give my regards to the household of Onesiphorus. Oh, Onesiphorus, he was such a blessing. He often refreshed me. If you read it, I believe it's in 2 Timothy chapter 1. I believe it is. But in one of the epistles, he talks about how Onesiphorus zealously sought him out to find him and encourage him. Wow. I think the Message of the New Living talks about how, I'm paraphrasing, but it says he looked high and low trying to find and locate me so that he could encourage me. If you're going to fulfill your destiny, you're going to have to make sure, I'm going to have to make sure that I have a right stewardship approach to my relationship with those who've been faithful to me, those who've been faithful to the ministry, those who've been faithful to support us, faithful to encourage us, faithful to serve. What is your relationship with the faithful people? It's so, you know who some of the most, no disrespect because we've all done it, but some of the most ungrateful people in the world are? Teenagers. You know, when you're a teenager, you don't appreciate what your folks are doing for you, the sacrifices you're making. I say this with a ton of shame, a ton of grief, no regret, is that I remember when I was in college, I graduated after my second semester. So I knew no matter what I did for the semesters 3 and 4, I was walking down that aisle with 2 diplomas. And I remember I hung out, I did everything that you do when you're a senior in college. And I remember saying, man, this is an absolute shame because my father was working 2 shifts on transit under the ground to pay for my tuition. And I remember feeling so convicted. I said, what are you doing? You're over here lollygagging. He's putting in 60, 70, 80 hours a week underground to pay those last tuition payments. Well, obviously once I was blessed, and when I worked on Wall Street, the Lord blessed me financially. And one of the first things I did was I started paying him back. And I don't mean like in installments, but I start honoring him. I start tangibly respecting the sacrifice he made to help me get my degrees. What's your point, Chris? When people have been faithful to you, what's your relationship with them? But I really want to challenge you. Now that I have this outline, now that I've given it to you, I promise you, if you'll read the scriptures, the Holy Spirit will start screaming to you about your own interpersonal dynamics. And you'll say, this is an Onesiphorus. This is someone who refreshes you. Don't be casual about them. They'll say to you, this is an Alexander the coppersmith. Grieve it. It's not going to be what you thought. The person's not where you thought they were in their season. This is a Demas. This is someone who started out with you, but they're not here today. If the sweet's gone, stop chewing the gum. They'll say to you, this is a Barnabas. This is someone who's an encourager. You may say, man, Lord, I'm going through a season. I don't know what's going on. I don't even feel your love for me. I don't feel your presence. It feels so dry. All of a sudden, the Spirit will say, well, why don't you get near a Barnabas? You know who's a Barnabas? Ken. He's a natural encourager. He brings no matter what's going on in his life, he's a Barnabas. Edmay's a Barnabas. If you'll read it through the filter of how we're discussing it, the Holy Spirit will prick you. He'll say, you know what? You need to get with Barnabas because they share my love tangibly. They're God in flesh. 2 Timothy, we're talking about relationships that were strained and later restored. Relationships that are strained and later restored. Let's read it for a second. Acts chapter 15. Because I want you to see this. You read this in your quiet time and you don't have the right perspective. This is right before the second missionary journey. This is just some little Bible story that you read and don't even think about unless you have the proper perspective. We know that Paul and Barnabas were getting ready to go on the second missionary journey. Acts chapter 15, verse 36. Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let us now go back to visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord and see how they're doing. What's that? Relationships at a distance. Remember, Paul got you born again. He didn't leave you hanging. He kept checking up on you. Now Barnabas was determined to take with him John, called Mark. This was his cousin. But Paul insisted that they should not take with them the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. Now, you can't tell this in the English language. It says, then the contention became so sharp that they parted from one another. And so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and departed, being commended by the brethren to the grace of God. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. But focus on verse 39. It says that the contention became sharp. This is how the English says it, but if you know the Greek, I'm not saying this happened, but if they had a fist fight, it wouldn't have been an exaggeration. In other words, have you ever had a moment with someone you thought was so close to you just escalate? And you go, wow, how we get up? That's what happened here.